Imagine a world where spies disguise themselves as monks, where secret treaties determine the fate of entire nations, and where two global superpowers engage in a silent, deadly struggle for control. This wasn't fiction. It was the Great Game. For nearly a century, the British and Russian empires played a dangerous game of geopolitical chess, using diplomacy, espionage, and military force to gain control over Central Asia. But why did these two empires risk war over these vast remote lands? What made Central Asia so important? And who were the fearless spies, adventurers, and diplomats shaping history from the shadows? From treacherous mountain passes to grand palaces, this was a battle fought in secret and in the open, with consequences that still echo today. Welcome to the Great Game, one of history's most thrilling and high-stakes rivalries. In the early 19th century, Central Asia was a vast, untamed region filled with independent khanates, nomadic tribes, and powerful trading cities like Bukhara and Samarkand. It was also the ultimate prize for two of the world's greatest empires, Britain and Russia. For Britain, the stakes were clear. India was the crown jewel of the British Empire, providing immense wealth and strategic power. But looming to the north was Russia, a growing empire expanding southward, swallowing territories one by one. If Russia reached Afghanistan, it could threaten British control over India itself. Meanwhile, Russia had its own ambitions. The empire was landlocked in the north, desperate for access to warm water ports and increased trade routes. Conquering Central Asia would secure Russia's dominance over the region and challenge British supremacy. This growing tension set the stage for a century-long struggle, where maps were redrawn, kingdoms were overthrown, and spies operated in the shadows, all for imperial dominance. As tensions rose, Britain and Russia sent spies, explorers, and military officers deep into Central Asia, each trying to outmaneuver the other. This was a war fought not only on battlefields but in the shadows, through covert intelligence, secret missions, and daring adventures. One of the most famous figures was Alexander Burnes, a British officer and explorer who traveled to Afghanistan disguised as a merchant. His reports alarmed British officials. He warned that Russia was making diplomatic moves in Kabul. In response, Britain invaded Afghanistan in 1839 to install a pro-British ruler, but the plan backfired. The Afghans rebelled, and during the disastrous retreat from Kabul in 1842, nearly 16,500 British and Indian troops were massacred, one of Britain's worst military defeats. Meanwhile, Russia was making its own moves. In the 1860s, Russian forces conquered Tashkent, Samarkand, and Bukhara, bringing them dangerously close to British India. The British countered by sending spies like Robert Shaw, who ventured into Kashgar to gather intelligence on Russian expansion. Both empires engaged in espionage warfare, using bribery, coded messages, and double agents. Russian and British spies disguised themselves as traders, holy men, and scholars, risking their lives to gather intelligence. One wrong move could mean capture, torture, or execution. The Great Game wasn't just about land, it was about secrets, survival, and the silent war for supremacy. As Russia's forces pushed further south, the rivalry between the two empires reached its most dangerous phase. Both sides escalated their military presence, knowing that one wrong move could ignite a full-scale war. One of the tensest moments came in 1885 during the Panjshir incident. Russian troops advancing aggressively into northern Afghanistan attacked Afghan forces at Panjshir, a strategic outpost just miles from British-controlled territory. The British government saw this as an act of war, and for a moment, it seemed inevitable. Troops were mobilized, the Royal Navy was put on high alert, and Britain prepared for battle. The British press fueled nationalistic fervor, calling for swift retaliation. Political leaders debated whether to strike back, knowing that a war between these two massive empires could reshape the world. Meanwhile, Russia played a dangerous game of brinkmanship, refusing to withdraw, but also hesitant to push Britain over the edge. At the last moment, diplomatic negotiations prevailed. Both nations knew that a direct war would be catastrophic, so they agreed on a compromise. Britain allowed Russia to retain Panjshir, while Russia promised to respect Afghanistan's independence, at least on paper. But the arms race didn't stop. Russia continued building railways and military outposts, while Britain fortified its borders and reinforced its spies. The Great Game had become a silent war, fought not with armies but with maps, treaties, and deception. The world had narrowly avoided a war, but for how long? By the early 20th century, the world was changing, and so were the priorities of Britain and Russia. Britain, once solely focused on defending India, now saw Germany as its greatest threat in Europe. Meanwhile, Russia was reeling from a humiliating defeat against Japan in 1905, an internal unrest that would soon lead to revolution. Realizing that their rivalry in Central Asia was becoming too costly, both empires signed the Anglo-Russian Agreement of 1907. This treaty divided Persia, Afghanistan, and Tibet into zones of influence, effectively ending the Great Game. But the legacy of this century-long struggle remains. The borders drawn during this period continue to shape modern Central Asia. Afghanistan, once the battleground of the Great Game, remained a key flashpoint in global politics. And in many ways, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was just a new version of the same old game, this time played on a global scale. The Great Game may have ended, but its consequences still shape the world today. The struggle for influence in Central Asia didn't stop. It just evolved. New players have entered the game, but the stakes remain the same: power, control, and survival. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on what historical conflict we should cover next. The past is full of hidden stories. Let's uncover them together.